Recently, I got a call from the owner of Midwest Motors who said, I have an extremely rare Ferrari 488 Spider. Would you like to come take a look at it? And I said, absolutely. I just bought a car from them. I did some video with them, and I thought it would be cool to see. Well, the one thing I can tell you as a solo shooter videographer, I do all the editing, I do all the sound engineering, music, everything beginning to end. It takes me forever to put a video together. So having maybe only a couple hours with a Ferrari is not something that I'm used to doing. But in the case of this video, that's why it's a short review format. And you're gonna get to see a little bit of what it's like to be in that type of car. Now, if you've seen a 458 recently and then you take a look at this, my God, does this look better. In terms of aerodynamics, they've improved the front, the lower splitter, the overall venting, but underneath, this carries over a lot from the 458. Right down to suspension geometry, a lot of that is very similar. Overall, the exterior is just all about purpose and airflow, from the carbon ceramic brakes to the vent work in the back, including the engine cover. It's all to dissipate heat. It's all for aerodynamics to give this car the downforce it needs when obviously you're at double-digit speeds like you would be for the most part all the time. When you get to the price point of the 488 of $267,000+ for this, and this is well over $300 with the way that it's optioned, you expect certain things. And with Ferrari, you get just a long history of racing, aerodynamicists working on it, and that's why you get some of these crazy accents. Like the door handle doubles as a little winglet that helps to flow air over these panels and into the intercoolers and back through the engine to keep it cool. So there's so much functionality and purpose here that we could go on for hours about it. I'm in the shop, and Turbowski's out of town, go figure, because I have a gem here for him, a Ferrari 488 Spider. But he decided he's gonna go to a car show in northern Alaska with his PT Cruiser convertible as usual. So what we have here is a whole lot of nothing underneath. Everything's covered up. In fact, I would need a Ferrari engineer probably to tell me what all these little details do. But for the most part, surprisingly, when you look at this, doesn't look like some esoteric car. You have plastic panels, composite panels. You have cast aluminum pieces, forged aluminum pieces that you would see on a car, sub $100,000. It just doesn't look all that fancy. I'm actually surprised by that. You have carbon ceramic brakes. You have electronically controlled and variable adjusting dampers, in-wheel double wishbone suspension on the front, and then of course, these little rubber air director flaps to help move, obviously, air from underneath the car. You have air inlets to move air over the coolers. Obviously, there's ductwork that runs to the back as well to the probably engine and transmission. But again, without a Ferrari engineer here, it's just kind of guesswork. But let's take a look at the back. As we get towards the rear of the Ferrari, this is obviously where the motor and transmission is. But Todd and Brian, the mechanics here, they're a little shy today because they're so stressed at looking at this high-performance machine. They're a little jealous that Scott's with his PT Cruiser right now. But they gave me a quart of this Pennzoil oil, and you know that it's special because it's got a Ferrari stamp on here. So this increases the value about 6,000%. But like Todd told me, you could go to Walmart and buy the same shit and do this on your own. And so what he showed me back here, much like the 458, most of the time that it takes to service this, at least doing oil changes, is like every other modern car, you gotta drop these aero panels. It's 20 some odd bolts to drop it down. And then like the 458, there's about 7 or 8 drain plugs to drain all the oil out. You drain the sump first, and then you go and get all the other little channels of oil out to be able to service this. So that's what takes the most time. Now, looking at this, I could say most normal people could do it on their own, aside from the jack points, because of course, Ferrari's decided that they use a special mount or a screw-in type jack, so you can't just use a regular jack because you can't drop the panel down enough. So that's one thing to note about the back, and that's really all you can see. So here's the interesting part about maintenance. If you buy a car like this new, you have the option to get a 7-year maintenance plan, which is going to cost you a pretty penny. If you don't do the 7-year maintenance plan, which covers, all your service aside from brakes, you're stuck with 2 years. Now, most people that are going to buy this are probably not going to keep it that long, but if you're going to buy this used, that's definitely one thing to look at. You want to make sure that there's a 7-year maintenance plan done on it, and also that the previous owner had all that stuff done by Ferrari or had it done by a shop and then certified by Ferrari. Because if you miss a service on here, and there's a timer on this car, if you miss a service and you have that 7-year plan or 2-year plan, what happens is you bring it into the shop for your service, you miss it, the plan is canceled. You have to pay to reactivate it and do a whole bunch of paperwork in regards to that. So you want to keep up on this. You don't want to be lazy and tour the jungles of South America or whatever the hell you're going to do, or go to Alaska like Scott. When we get under the trunk, the boot, whatever the hell you want to call it, you have this massive V8. Now, what Ferrari's decided to do from the 458 is give it twin turbos. And for the first time, this twin turbo almost has the exact same throttle response as the naturally aspirated version of this motor from the 458. And that's partly why it's so enjoyable to drive, not only on the street and on the track. There's no sense of turbo lag. There's no sense of the things that you usually get with turbocharged cars. Now, if you're somebody like me and most people that enjoy driving, especially on track cars, we like higher revving, naturally aspirated motors. You have less problems with heat, all the things that you associate with turbocharged cars. Well, they've spent an enormous amount of time trying to eliminate problems with heat, lag, throttle response, overall sound. This is almost the same, if not better, than the 458's engine note. And somehow they've put all that together, and that's mostly what you're paying for here is the engine and trans. That's what's the most magical about this Ferrari, well, aside from the looks, if this is your bag. We are in the Ferrari 488 in the middle of rush hour traffic, and what that means is you really can't do much except short bursts of acceleration. I have no idea what you would do with this car on the street. I'd like to actually know and meet some owners of it to see what their lifestyle is, because it's just so fast, even compared to the 458. The 458 was fast in a different way, but because you have the boost, because you have the additional horsepower here, it's just incredible how quickly this car picks up and how fast it's all over if you want to keep your license. One of the things, well, actually one of the best parts about Ferraris and what they're known for is their dual clutch transmissions are just so far beyond what everybody else has done. Everything they've learned from Formula One has been applied to their street cars here, and it's just, I complain how I have a distaste for automated manuals, and then you get in a car like this, and if I could have an automated manual like this in most cars, it would be a non-issue. Now here's the reality of having a supercar in the real world, is when you're not on a track and you're not on a back road or a canyon road, you're just crawling around. And this gets reduced to pretty much any other car. A PT Cruiser GT would be just as much fun as this Ferrari right now in just the daily grind. So most people want to know what it's like to drive a Ferrari every day. Well, aside from the ridiculous brakes and acceleration, this is strangely comfortable. It feels like a luxury car or a sporty luxury car. There's nothing in here that screams like, oh, this is a race car, it's gonna break your back or be totally uncomfortable. I could see actually driving this every day, although it's kind of insane to do so. things Ferrari talks about with this car is their stability control system, the way that it can adapt to various different modes. So what this means is it's yet another supercar that makes it accessible for those who have really no driving expertise. You can get in here, never been on a racetrack before, never driven fast, and just be comfortable. And of course, there's about 20 different settings in here to adjust. Now, all the way down to, you have directly on the steering wheel, you have wet, sport, race, and then of course everything off, which would be absolutely dangerous in this car to go every driver's aid off. You would have to be on a very wide open area, probably a track, to even exploit some of that. This feels so much better than the 458. I mean, its ability to turn in is just razor sharp. It's crazy. I spent a day probably with the 458 and I tracked it. Of course, I haven't tracked this car, but I can immediately tell with its road manners, and the suspension and the overall damping feel very similar, but it's just its eagerness to turn in and that low end power that's there compared to the 458. You had to wind the piss out of the 458 all the time, which is of course amazing. But with this car, it's just instant on as soon as you're on the throttle. All the boost picks up early and it just takes you all the way to the red line. The only thing I could really complain about is I wish this thing wound up even higher. It seems like the fuel cutoff comes on pretty quick. Well, that's because you're, you're going balls to the wall, of course. At first, I thought about, well, would you really want to spend $260 some odd thousand on the 488 here? And the reality is when you get behind the wheel and drive it, the straight answer is, if you had the money, of course. But it's just so much fun to power down and just put the power down and just go flat out in this car. I don't know how long you would actually have a license driving this car around on the streets every day. We talk about being realistic about cars quite often, and this is yet another car that you just wonder, well, you'll never reach its potential on the street and likely on the track. There's so much downforce, there's so much aero designed into it, so much overall grip that it's just kind of lost. And I think that's one of the things that you forget about driving, slower cars. And we talk about the ND Miata all the time, where you could just drive it on the street, go flat out 100% of the time and have a ton of fun, whereas this car, you're really limited to maybe 10% of its capability. You have to, there's so much restraint required to driving this on a public road that I think that's one of the things that kills the fun for me. So what's the conclusion with my day in the Ferrari? One thing I can tell you is this car optioned out was worth over $300,000. And that had me thinking, it's worth more than my life. Somebody could legitimately take that money and pay somebody to put a hit out on me and they would do it. It's worth more than my house and most people's houses. And I think the strangest part is I could take that $300,000, buy a race car, 3 really cool daily drivers, a truck, and a trailer to tow my race car to the track. And that's where the money doesn't add up, specifically when you look at the underbody. Now, the big thing is you're paying for the chassis, you're paying for the prestige and the brand history, you're paying for their Formula One experience and somewhat subsidizing that. But you are getting one of the best transmissions, you're getting one of the best built motors in the world. But again, these cars their value tends to die after 10,000 miles. And the cost to maintain them over the course of the life is just for those 1%ers. And I think that's one of the most disappointing parts and the most exciting parts. If you're a 1%er and can afford this, it's totally exclusive to you. If you're not, well, it keeps you dreaming, maybe one day. So the funny thing about this Ferrari 488 is the mechanics that work here think it's kind of a joke. Their favorite car is the Chrysler LeBaron convertible. So to them, this is just, this is an everyday car.